The evening air was warm as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. The streets were alive with the hum of cars and the chatter of people heading to dinners, theaters, and events. Among the many establishments lining the streets, there was a restaurant that stood out. Its tall glass windows reflected the lights of the city like mirrors, and through them, one could see an elegant interior with crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The tables were dressed in white linen, polished silverware glinting under the lights, and soft music floated through the air. It was a place where the wealthy and influential often gathered, a place where every detail spoke of luxury and refinement. Inside, a young server moved gracefully between the tables, carrying trays laden with glasses of wine and plates of carefully prepared dishes. She had a calm and gentle demeanor, her movements precise yet unassuming. She wore a simple black uniform that did nothing to hint at her extraordinary talents, hidden beneath her modest appearance. As she navigated the crowded room, she observed the guests with quiet curiosity. Some were deep in conversation, their laughter rich and lively. Others whispered among themselves, their eyes occasionally glancing around as if sizing up the company. She had worked here long enough to notice the subtle differences in how people spoke, how they carried themselves, and how they treated the staff. She knew the rules of this world, the invisible lines that separated the guests from those who served them. The restaurant owner, a man with a sharp eye and a keen sense of humor, leaned against the bar, watching the scene unfold. He had a mischievous idea brewing, one that would test both the server and the reactions of the guests. He called her over and with a playful smile asked, "Would you like to play the piano for our guests tonight?" His tone suggested that it was a joke, something meant to amuse the patrons. He expected a quick laugh and a polite refusal, but when he looked at her face, he saw something different. There was a flicker of surprise, yes, but also a spark of something he couldn't quite place. It was confidence, quiet and unassuming, that seemed out of place in someone so young and humble. The server hesitated. Her hands fidgeted slightly as she glanced at the grand piano in the corner of the room. It was a beautiful instrument, polished to a shine with ivory keys that gleamed under the soft light. Her mind raced with questions. Could she really do this in front of such an elite crowd? Would they laugh at her as the owner might have hoped? But another thought pushed her forward. She loved music. She had spent countless hours alone, practicing, learning, and dreaming. The piano had been her companion through many quiet nights, and now it called to her again. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Yes," she said softly, almost to herself. The owner's eyes twinkled with surprise and amusement. He signaled to the guests, making a casual announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, our wonderful server has graciously agreed to play a piece for us tonight." There were polite claps from some tables, a few curious murmurs, and the soft clinking of glasses as people turned to see her approach the piano. Some guests raised their eyebrows, others smirked, assuming this would be a brief, awkward performance. They could not have guessed the impact she would soon have. As she walked to the piano, her heart pounded in her chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She was not a performer by profession, but she was a musician in her own right. Years of secret practice had prepared her for this moment, though she had never imagined doing it in front of such a crowd. She reached the piano and paused for a heartbeat, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys. The polished surface reflected her hands, and she took a deep breath, letting the familiar scent of the instrument calm her nerves. The room was quiet now, every eye on her. The soft background music had faded and the chatter had died down, replaced by anticipation. She could feel the weight of the guests' expectations, their curiosity, and perhaps a touch of skepticism. She reminded herself that music was universal, that it could speak where words could not. Closing her eyes for a moment, she let her fingers find their place on the keys, feeling the familiar textures and the cool touch of ivory beneath her fingertips. Her first notes were soft, almost hesitant, as if testing the waters. They floated through the room like a gentle breeze, catching the attention of those who had been watching with mild amusement. There was a pause, a moment of silence as the guests realized that this was not going to be a simple, clumsy attempt. The notes were precise, clear, and filled with emotion. The music began to flow more confidently, weaving through melodies that were both familiar and yet deeply personal. It was as if the piano had become an extension of her soul, translating her thoughts and feelings into sound. The guests shifted in their seats, their expressions changing from polite curiosity to genuine intrigue. Some leaned forward, drawn in by the unexpected beauty of the music. The wealthy patrons, who were used to having the best of everything, found themselves captivated by this humble server, who could command such artistry with grace and humility. The music seemed to fill the room, reaching into corners, touching hearts, and stirring emotions that no one had anticipated. The server's fingers moved with fluidity, guided by instinct and years of practice. She played with a balance of technical skill and emotional depth that was rare to witness. Her eyes occasionally glanced up at the audience, noting their reactions, but she did not falter. Each note, each chord was deliberate, a statement of who she was and what she could do. The contrast between her modest appearance and the richness of her performance made the room sit in stunned silence, unable to look away or speak. Time seemed to slow as she continued to play. The music carried stories of longing, joy, and quiet triumph, all without a single word. The guests were no longer just diners. They were listeners, travelers on a journey that only the server and her piano could take them on. The owner watched from the side, a mix of amazement and pride on his face. What had started as a playful joke had transformed into a moment of genuine wonder, a testament to the power of talent, courage, and authenticity. By the time she reached the end of her piece, the room was completely captivated. There was a brief, reverent silence, as if everyone needed a moment to process what they had just heard. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room. At first it was tentative, polite, but it quickly grew louder, more enthusiastic. The clapping echoed off the walls, a wave of appreciation and admiration that filled every corner of the restaurant. Some guests were on their feet, their expressions a mixture of shock and delight. They had not expected this, and yet they could not deny the beauty they had witnessed. The server smiled softly, a mix of relief and quiet pride washing over her. She had stepped into the unknown and emerged not only unscathed but celebrated. She realized in that moment that music was not about where you came from, what you wore, or what others expected. It was about the connection, the honesty, and the courage to share your gift, no matter how humble you might feel. As she stood and received the applause, she knew that her life had shifted in a way that could never be undone. The piano had given her a voice, and the world had finally heard it. After the first notes floated into the air, a strange hush settled over the restaurant. The guests had been chatting, clinking glasses, and laughing just moments ago, but now every sound seemed distant. All eyes were on her, the young server who had quietly taken a seat at the grand piano. She could feel the weight of their attention, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt a strange clarity. The room had changed, transformed from a place of casual dining into a space where music ruled and every heart listened. Her fingers found confidence as they danced over the keys. The hesitance of the first few notes faded, replaced by a gentle flow that felt natural. Like breathing, she allowed herself to forget the world around her, the elite crowd, the bright chandeliers, and even the owner who had encouraged her in jest. In that moment, there was only her, the piano, and the music that wanted to be born from her hands. Each chord resonated, echoing softly in the elegant room, filling it with warmth and emotion. The piece she played was not something she had prepared specifically for the restaurant. It was one of her favorites, a melody she had composed in quiet hours at home, combining notes she had loved from classical music with her own simple touches. She had never performed it for anyone outside her small circle of friends and family. Now, as the notes traveled through the room, she realized the vulnerability of sharing something so personal, yet she did not stop. Instead, she allowed herself to pour every feeling, every small joy and hidden sadness into the music. The guests, at first polite listeners, began to lean in. The soft smiles turned into attentive faces, and the polite clapping at the end of phrases was replaced by silent awe. The wealthy businessmen and socialites who had been skeptical now looked genuinely curious. They had seen many performers, many artists, and yet something about this young server was different. There was no pretense, no showmanship, just pure, honest music coming from a place of sincerity. As the music flowed, she began to incorporate subtle variations, delicate runs, and soft pauses that made the piece feel alive. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, guided by instinct and years of private practice. She remembered her childhood, sitting at an old, battered piano in a small room filled with sunlight. Her parents had not understood her love for music, yet they never stopped her from playing. Those quiet moments had taught her patience, focus, and how to listen deeply, not just to the notes, but to the spaces between them. A few patrons exchanged glances, their expressions slowly changing from polite interest to surprise and admiration. The woman at the corner table, wearing an elegant gown, had tears welling up in her eyes. She whispered to her companion, marveling at the skill and emotion she had just witnessed. A man who had been checking his phone suddenly put it down, his attention fully captured by the performance. The room was no longer divided by social status or wealth. It was united by the beauty of the music that flowed effortlessly from a young server's hands. The owner, who had initially thought this would be a playful joke, now watched with his mouth slightly open. He had expected laughter, perhaps a clumsy performance, but what he saw instead was a display of raw talent and grace. He realized that this server, who had quietly served tables for months, held something extraordinary. His mind raced as he considered the possibilities, imagining her performing in places he had only read about, playing for crowds far larger than this small, luxurious restaurant. Encouraged by the growing attention, the server allowed herself to play with more freedom. She explored the higher octaves, letting the notes soar and resonate. She added gentle arpeggios, letting each note shimmer in the warm light of the chandeliers. Her confidence grew with each passing moment, and she felt a sense of liberation she had never known. The music was no longer just a secret passion. It was a voice she could share, and the audience responded with an unspoken understanding. The crowd's reaction was palpable. Some guests whispered to one another, trying to put into words the beauty they were hearing. Others simply closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, feeling emotions they hadn't expected to feel in a place usually reserved for polite conversation and fine dining. It was as if the piano had become a bridge between worlds, the humble life of a server and the extravagant lives of the elite, connecting them through the universal language of music. As the piece reached its midpoint, she slowed down intentionally, creating tension and allowing silence to speak between the notes. The pauses were as powerful as the music itself, giving the audience a chance to absorb every detail, every emotion. She could sense their anticipation, the way they leaned forward slightly, waiting for the next note to reveal itself. Her heart beat in rhythm with the music, each pulse guiding her fingers across the keys. The music began to build again, gently at first, then with increasing energy. The melodies intertwined, creating layers of sound that were both complex and accessible. She smiled slightly, remembering the small victories of her practice sessions at home, the late nights when she would play until her fingers ached, convinced that no one would ever hear her music. Now those quiet moments of dedication were paying off in ways she had never imagined. Some guests had begun to clap softly in appreciation during brief pauses, and the sound encouraged her further. She played with even more heart, adding delicate ornaments and subtle flourishes that made the piece uniquely hers. Her emotions were not hidden, they were part of the performance, reaching out to touch the hearts of everyone in the room. The music was alive, a living expression of her courage, passion, and quiet determination. The owner, standing to the side, could not help but feel a sense of pride and wonder. He had always known that talent could appear in unexpected places, but witnessing it firsthand was something entirely different. The server, who had once seemed just another part of the background of his restaurant, had now become the center of attention, commanding respect and admiration with nothing more than her skill and authenticity. By the end of the piece, the room was completely enchanted. The last notes lingered in the air, delicate and full of emotion. There was a brief, reverent silence as the audience processed what they had just experienced. Then slowly the applause began. At first it was quiet, almost hesitant, but it quickly grew into a thunderous ovation. Patrons rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, their faces alight with genuine admiration. Some wiped away tears, others exchanged amazed smiles, and a few even whispered words of encouragement and wonder. The server sat at the piano, taking in the moment with a quiet smile. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, faced the skepticism and curiosity of an elite crowd, and emerged victorious, not with arrogance, but with grace and humility. The applause was a recognition not just of her skill, but of the courage it took to share a deeply personal part of herself with the world. As she stood and bowed slightly, she realized that something profound had happened. The room had changed, the guests had changed, and she had changed. She had discovered that her music had power, that it could move people and transcend social boundaries. The evening, which had begun as any other, had become a turning point in her life. The humble server who had approached the piano with nervous curiosity had revealed a hidden brilliance that would not soon be forgotten. The applause from her first piece had barely faded when a new wave of expectation settled over the room. The guests were no longer curious, they were captivated. Every eye was fixed on the server, who had now become more than just someone bringing drinks and plates. She was a musician, a storyteller, someone who could command attention with nothing but her fingers and the keys of a piano. The room seemed to hold its breath as though waiting for the next notes to carry them away again. She sat back down at the piano, letting her hands hover for a moment. There was a quiet thrill in the anticipation, a subtle energy that flowed from the audience to her and back again. She could feel the room leaning in, sensing that what came next would be special. Taking a deep breath, she let the first notes of the second piece escape, soft and tentative, but immediately recognized as deliberate and meaningful. The music had a different tone this time, more introspective, inviting each listener to follow along on a journey of subtle emotion. The melody began to weave around the room like a delicate ribbon, wrapping itself around the guests' hearts. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, while others leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder. The server could sense their reactions even without looking up. She had always believed that music was a conversation, not a performance. And now, in this elegant dining room filled with people who had once seemed distant and untouchable, she felt that conversation happening, flowing naturally and sincerely. Her fingers moved with a gentle confidence, tracing patterns across the keys that seemed simple, but were layered with nuance and emotion. Each chord resonated with clarity, each pause carefully measured, creating spaces where the audience could breathe, think, and feel. The wealthy patrons, accustomed to polished performances by trained professionals, found themselves surprised by the depth of expression coming from someone they had only seen serving tables. It was not just skill, it was authenticity, and it touched them deeply. As the music unfolded, the server allowed herself to add small improvisations. Slight embellishments and unexpected flourishes emerged naturally, reflecting the way she felt in the moment. There was no script, no need for perfection, only the desire to communicate. She remembered evenings spent practicing alone, experimenting with sounds and textures, feeling the thrill of discovering new ways to make the piano sing. Those private experiments had been her secret world, and now they were shared with an audience who could sense their sincerity. The audience reaction continued to grow. Conversations had ceased completely, replaced by a collective listening. Even the most skeptical guests leaned forward, trying to understand the source of this extraordinary talent. A man sitting at a corner table murmured to his companion, astonished, saying that he had never heard anything like this in all his years attending concerts and recitals. Others exchanged whispers about her compositional ability, the feeling that every note had been chosen with care and purpose. The server allowed herself to become fully immersed. Music had always been a refuge for her, a way to escape the ordinary and step into something greater. Tonight she realized it was more than that, it was a bridge. She had entered a world where she had no place, yet her music had granted her entry, had commanded respect and attention. The contrast between her modest life as a server and the grand atmosphere of the restaurant highlighted the extraordinary nature of her talent even more. Her fingers glided across the keys, moving faster now yet never losing clarity. She experimented with dynamics, soft passages swelling into crescendos that seemed to lift the room itself. Some guests instinctively leaned back, letting the sound envelop them. Others held their breath in anticipation, caught by the tension and release she created. Each chord spoke directly to the heart. Each phrase carried a story of quiet determination, perseverance, and passion that was impossible to ignore. The owner, who had initially played this as a light-hearted joke, stood at the edge of the room, now completely enthralled. He had seen many performers in his lifetime, but never one who could command attention so naturally, with no stage, no spotlight, no trained theatrics. She was not performing for applause or recognition. She was playing because the music demanded it, and the audience responded instinctively. He realized in that moment that he had discovered something rare, something that could not be manufactured or bought. The room, normally filled with polite murmurs and discreet laughter, was completely transformed. The guests' previous assumptions about who could entertain or inspire had been shattered. They were witnessing a story unfold without words, a narrative carried entirely through melody and emotion. Some whispered to their companions about the purity of her talent, the elegance of her expression, and the unexpected joy of discovering such skill in someone so humble. As the music reached its midpoint, she slowed intentionally, letting the melody linger and creating a tension that held the audience captive. The silence between notes was as meaningful as the notes themselves. The guests leaned forward, feeling every pause, sensing the emotions she conveyed with such subtlety. It was a lesson in patience, in listening, and in allowing the heart to engage fully with what was presented. In those moments, the barriers of social status and expectation disappeared. Leaving only shared human experience, she continued to play, letting her fingers explore new patterns, her music growing more expressive and layered. The piece began to swell, building a rich tapestry of sound that was both complex and accessible. Her improvisation became bolder, adding depth and texture that made each phrase unique. The audience, sensing the crescendo, responded instinctively. Some closed their eyes to better focus. Some nodded subtly, and others simply sat in awe, feeling emotions they hadn't expected to feel. The crescendo peaked, the notes flowing with a kind of power that felt unstoppable yet controlled. She smiled slightly, feeling the exhilaration of mastery and connection simultaneously. This was the culmination of years of quiet practice, the embodiment of her love for music and the reward of courage to step into the unknown. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy she created, a subtle rhythm that touched everyone present. Then, as the piece gently drew to a close, she allowed the final notes to hang in the air, delicate and soft, giving the audience a moment to absorb the full impact. The silence that followed was profound, filled with collective awe and admiration. The guests slowly began to clap, softly at first, then with growing enthusiasm. It was not just applause, it was recognition, respect, and amazement. Some were on their feet, clapping and cheering, moved by the unexpected brilliance of the young server who had taken a humble step into the spotlight. The server sat back, letting the final resonance fade. She had played not just with skill, but with honesty and emotion, revealing her inner world to a room of strangers who had quickly become captivated. In that moment, she understood the true power of music. It could break barriers, touch hearts, and create connections that words alone could never achieve. She looked around, seeing faces transformed by the experience, realizing that her music had sparked something remarkable. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to absorb it all, the applause, the smiles, the whispered admiration. She felt a quiet pride, not in vanity, but in knowing that she had shared something real, something that came from the heart. The room had been changed, and so had she. The young server had taken a chance, and in doing so, she had created a moment of beauty that would linger in the memory of everyone present long after the music had ended. The applause from her second performance was still echoing through the restaurant when the guests began to approach her. What had started as a playful, almost joking idea by the owner had become something extraordinary. People wanted to talk to her, to know more about the server who had transformed the atmosphere of the restaurant with her music. She felt a mix of pride and nervousness, unsure how to respond to the sudden attention but eager to share the truth about herself. One guest, an older gentleman who had been a professional musician in his younger years, stepped forward first. He looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Your music," he said softly. "It is unlike anything I have heard. Have you studied professionally?" The server shook her head, a gentle smile forming on her lips. She explained that she had learned to play as a child and had spent countless hours practicing at home, away from any public stage. Music had always been a private world for her, a place to express herself freely without judgment. The man listened carefully, nodding, clearly impressed. He wasn't the only one intrigued. Others gathered around, asking questions about her background, her training, and her inspirations. She answered each question with honesty, sharing the small details of her life, the quiet dedication and the love she had for music. The guests listened, captivated not only by her story but also by her humility. Despite the sudden attention and praise, she remained grounded, a quality that made the audience respect her even more. The restaurant owner, observing from a distance, felt a sense of pride he hadn't anticipated. He had expected laughter, maybe a few polite claps, and then life would go back to normal. Instead, he was witnessing a genuine recognition of talent, and it was happening before his very eyes. The server, who had always been part of the background, was now at the center of attention, commanding admiration without even trying. He realized that talent often hides in the most unexpected places, waiting for the right moment to emerge. A young woman, a frequent guest at the restaurant, approached with tears in her eyes. She explained that the music had touched her deeply, bringing back memories of her childhood and the time she had spent learning an instrument herself. She expressed gratitude, saying that the performance had reminded her of the beauty of simple, heartfelt expression. The server listened, touched by the words. She had never imagined that her private music could have such an impact on strangers. Yet it was clear that it had resonated deeply. Among the crowd was a well-known talent scout who had been dining quietly at the back of the room. He stepped forward, introducing himself and expressing his admiration. He told her that he had seen many performers, but very few possessed the combination of skill, emotion, and authenticity that she displayed. He encouraged her to consider a professional path, suggesting that there were venues, orchestras, and events where her music could reach a much larger audience. The offer was both flattering and daunting. She had never thought of pursuing music as a career. It had always been her private passion. Now the idea of taking that step felt both exciting and overwhelming. Friends and co-workers who were present in the restaurant had gathered as well, offering congratulations and support. They recognized the moment for what it was, a turning point in her life. They encouraged her, emphasizing that this was a rare opportunity, one that could lead to something greater if she chose to embrace it. The server felt a mixture of emotions, pride, disbelief, and a hint of fear about the unknown path ahead. Yet amidst all this there was a strong sense of joy. Her music had connected with people, had inspired and moved them, and that was a feeling she could never forget. As the evening progressed, she noticed how the dynamics in the restaurant had shifted. The guests were no longer focused on social status, wealth, or appearances. Instead, they were united in their appreciation for the music and the person behind it. It was a moment where humility and talent transcended boundaries, a reminder that genuine skill and passion could capture hearts in ways that money and prestige could not. The server felt a deep sense of fulfillment, realizing that she had contributed something meaningful to the lives of the people around her. The owner approached her finally, a warm smile on his face. He congratulated her, telling her that she had exceeded every expectation and had created a memory that everyone present would remember for a long time. He expressed a desire to support her in any way he could, whether through continued performances at the restaurant or introductions to other influential figures who could help her pursue music further. The server felt grateful, touched by the generosity and encouragement, and began to consider the possibilities that had once seemed out of reach. Throughout the evening, she reflected on her journey. She remembered quiet nights at home, practicing in solitude, dreaming of music without imagining that it could one day reach others in such a powerful way. She thought about the countless small decisions that had led her here, the persistence, the patience, and the belief that music had value even when it was only heard by herself. Those quiet choices had culminated in this extraordinary moment, proving that dedication and passion could lead to remarkable opportunities. By the end of the night, the restaurant had returned to a calm and elegant atmosphere, but the impact of her performances lingered. Guests continued to discuss the experience, praising the depth and beauty of her music. Some spoke of attending future performances, eager to hear more, while others marveled at how a server had captured the hearts of an elite crowd. The server herself felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had not only shared her music, but had also inspired others through her authenticity and courage. As she cleaned up and prepared to leave, she thought about the new possibilities opening before her. The idea of performing in professional venues, of reaching wider audiences, was both thrilling and intimidating. She realized that stepping into this new world would require courage, just as stepping up to the piano in the restaurant had. Yet she also felt a sense of determination, a quiet assurance that she could navigate this new path while remaining true to herself and her love for music. The night ended with a mixture of reflection and anticipation. She had discovered that her talent was not just a private joy, but a gift that could touch others profoundly. She had seen firsthand the power of music to connect people across differences, to inspire, and to create unforgettable moments. And as she left the restaurant, she carried with her a new understanding of her own potential, a sense of purpose that would guide her in the chapters of life yet to come. The following days brought a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm, the familiar hum of conversation and clinking glasses filling the air. Yet for the young server, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The memory of her performances and the applause of the guests lingered vividly in her mind. She found herself replaying the music in her head, imagining the expressions on the faces of the guests, the sparkle in their eyes as the notes reached them. It was a sensation she had never experienced, a mixture of pride, joy, and an unfamiliar nervous anticipation for what might come next. Word of her talent spread quickly among the regular patrons of the restaurant. Some of them returned just to see her play again, eager to witness her skill and the emotion she brought to the piano. They spoke to one another in hushed tones, marveling at how someone who had appeared so unassuming could command the room with music alone. The young server noticed their curiosity and admiration, but she remained humble, aware of the long journey that had brought her to this moment and the work that lay ahead. One afternoon, a phone call arrived at the restaurant. It was from the talent scout who had been so impressed by her performance. He introduced himself again and explained that he had spoken to several venues and musical organizations interested in her talent. He offered her the opportunity to play in a private concert, an event with guests who were influential in the music industry. At first, the offer seemed almost unreal. She had never imagined that her music could reach such a wide and influential audience. Doubt crept in, questions swirling in her mind. Could she perform outside the comfort of the restaurant? Would she be able to rise to the occasion? Her co-workers, who had witnessed her remarkable performances, encouraged her to take the opportunity. They reminded her of the hours she had spent practicing, the dedication that had brought her to this point, and the undeniable connection she had with music. They told her that this was her chance, a rare moment that could change her life, and that she had the skill, courage, and heart to succeed. The support gave her courage, helping to quiet the fear that had begun to creep in. In the following days, she dedicated herself to preparing for the upcoming performance. She spent hours at the piano after her shifts, practicing every note, experimenting with melodies, and ensuring that her music reflected her emotions and intentions. Each practice session became an exploration, a way to refine her skill while staying true to her unique voice. She felt a growing sense of purpose, a deepening understanding that her music was not just a personal joy, but a gift she could share with others. The anticipation grew as the day of her first professional performance approached. She was nervous, feeling the weight of expectation and the unknown, but she also felt excitement. She remembered the first time she had approached the piano in the restaurant, the fear and hesitation that had transformed into exhilaration and connection. She drew strength from that memory, reminding herself that music was a conversation and that her voice, her story, was worth sharing. On the day of the performance, she arrived at the venue early. It was a grand concert hall, with polished wooden floors, tall windows letting in soft light, and rows of seats waiting to be filled. She walked slowly toward the piano, feeling a familiar sense of calm despite the grandeur around her. This was a different world from the restaurant, but the piano felt the same. Its keys were cool beneath her fingers, familiar and comforting. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and let her hands rest on the keys, breathing deeply and centering herself. When the audience began to arrive, she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. People were dressed elegantly, their eyes filled with curiosity and expectation. She sensed their anticipation, their eagerness to witness something extraordinary. The music began to flow, soft at first, each note deliberate, expressing the emotions she carried within. The hall was quiet, attentive, every listener fully engaged in the unfolding performance. As she continued, her confidence grew. The music became richer, more expressive, moving through gentle melodies, sweeping crescendos, and delicate harmonies. She played with the same sincerity and authenticity that had captivated the restaurant guests, allowing her emotions to guide her fingers. The audience responded instinctively, leaning forward, closing their eyes, and letting the music fill their hearts. It was a conversation without words, a connection that transcended appearances, titles, and status. The hall was alive with emotion. Some listeners were moved to tears. Others nodded subtly in appreciation, and a few whispered to one another about the unexpected brilliance of a young musician who had once been a server in a restaurant. The performance was not only a display of technical skill but also a demonstration of courage, humility, and passion. Every note was imbued with the story of her journey, the quiet dedication and the joy she found in music. The climax of the performance was powerful and evocative. Her fingers danced across the keys, building intensity and complexity, drawing the audience into a shared emotional experience. The crescendo carried through the hall, a wave of sound and feeling that left everyone breathless. And then with a gentle diminuendo the music concluded, each note fading gracefully into silence. The audience sat in awe, absorbing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. When the applause began, it was overwhelming. Standing ovations filled the hall, clapping and cheers echoing off the walls. People rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes, recognizing the courage and talent that had been displayed. She stood, bowing deeply, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never experienced before. The performance had not only demonstrated her skill, but had also conveyed her heart, her story, and her dedication to music. After the performance, several influential figures approached her, offering opportunities, guidance, and encouragement. They spoke of future concerts, collaborations, and invitations to prestigious events. Each offer was an acknowledgement of her talent and her potential to inspire others. She listened carefully, humbled by the recognition, yet also invigorated by the possibilities that lay ahead. She realized that this was a new chapter in her life, one that required courage, hard work, and continued dedication. In the quiet moments after the audience had departed, she sat at the piano reflecting on her journey. She thought about the restaurant, the first hesitant notes she had played, the applause that had transformed her evening into something unforgettable. She thought about the hours of practice, the private moments of discovery, and the courage it had taken to share her music with strangers. And now, standing in a professional concert hall, she understood the power of perseverance, passion, and authenticity. The evening concluded with a sense of quiet triumph. She knew that the road ahead would be challenging, filled with new expectations and opportunities, but she felt prepared. Music had always been her guide, and she had learned to trust it, to trust herself, and to embrace the unknown. The young server who had once approached the piano nervously was now a musician stepping confidently into a broader world, ready to share her gift, touch hearts, and inspire others through the beauty and sincerity of her music. The first few months after her debut performance were a whirlwind of activity, growth, and reflection. The young musician had moved from the familiar comfort of the restaurant to performing in concert halls, private events, and small venues that allowed her to share her music with a wider audience. Each performance brought its own unique challenges and rewards, yet she approached them all with the same humility, sincerity, and focus that had captivated her first listeners. She quickly realized that professional opportunities required more than talent alone. There were rehearsals, arrangements, and moments of doubt when she questioned whether she could meet the expectations of new audiences. Yet each time she sat at a piano, the anxiety melted away, replaced by a sense of purpose and joy. She remembered the initial experience in the restaurant, when she had hesitated and then found confidence in the music itself. That memory became a guiding light, reminding her that her authenticity and connection to the music were more important than perfection. With each performance, her confidence and skill grew. She began experimenting with different styles and compositions, exploring how her own voice could blend with the techniques she had admired in the music she had studied over the years. She discovered that audiences were drawn not only to her technical ability, but also to the emotions she conveyed through her playing. People responded to the honesty in her music, to the feeling that each note came from a place of deep thought and personal experience. This realization inspired her to continue sharing pieces she had composed in solitude, works that reflected her journey, her hopes, and her dreams. The recognition she received also opened doors she had never imagined. Influential musicians and organizers invited her to collaborate, attend workshops, and perform at prestigious events. While some offers were exciting, she learned to evaluate them carefully, ensuring that each opportunity aligned with her values and allowed her to remain true to herself. The balance between ambition and humility became a central part of her journey, teaching her that success was not simply about fame or applause, but about meaningful connection and integrity in her work. Despite the growing fame, she remained grounded. She often thought back to the restaurant, to the quiet moments of practice, and to the joy of making music without expectation. Those experiences reminded her that music was a gift meant to be shared, and that the simplest expressions of talent could resonate as profoundly as the grandest performances. She maintained a routine that included time for personal reflection, practice, and connecting with those who had supported her from the beginning. The young musician also began to use her platform to inspire others. She spoke to aspiring performers, sharing her story of how a simple act of courage, walking up to a piano in a restaurant, had changed the course of her life. She emphasized the importance of persistence, dedication, and the willingness to embrace opportunities even when they felt intimidating. Her message resonated with many, reminding them that talent could be found in unexpected places and that confidence and authenticity were as important as technical skill. Over time, her performances grew even more expressive and nuanced. She learned to communicate subtle emotions through slight variations in tempo, the softness or strength of a chord, and the silence between notes. Audiences became attuned to these subtleties, responding with quiet awe and deep appreciation. Each concert became a shared experience, a conversation without words where emotions, stories, and human connection flowed freely. The joy she felt in these moments reinforced her belief that music was a bridge between people, transcending social and cultural boundaries. Financial stability also became a reality, but she remained mindful of her roots. She continued to carry herself with humility, treating each new opportunity with gratitude rather than entitlement. She maintained contact with her friends and colleagues from the restaurant, remembering that their support had played a significant role in her initial success. Their encouragement and belief in her talent had been a source of strength during the early stages of her journey. As she reflected on her progress, she realized how transformative her experiences had been. The young server who had hesitated in front of an elite crowd had grown into a confident musician capable of moving people on a large scale. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. She had learned that sharing one's passion with sincerity could open doors, build relationships, and inspire change, not only in herself, but in others. Her journey also taught her the value of patience. Success had not come overnight. It had been built on years of quiet practice, dedication, and small choices that added up over time. She understood now that talent alone was never enough. It required perseverance, resilience, and the willingness to embrace both opportunities and challenges. The path she had walked demonstrated that even humble beginnings could lead to extraordinary outcomes when combined with passion and commitment. The impact of her music continued to spread. Audiences praised her performances, critics acknowledged her talent, and aspiring musicians found encouragement in her story. Yet she measured success not only by recognition, but by the connections she created and the joy she brought to those who listened. She continued to compose, to experiment, and to perform, always seeking to share something genuine and meaningful. The young musician often returned to her memories of the restaurant. The moment she had first walked up to the piano, unsure of herself but willing to try, she realized that one small act of courage had altered her life forever, setting her on a path that brought fulfillment, growth, and purpose. The experience reminded her that opportunities could arise in the most unexpected places, and that the willingness to embrace them with sincerity and passion was a powerful force. Years later, she would look back on this period as a defining moment. The humble server who had captured the hearts of an elite crowd became a musician whose influence extended far beyond the walls of any restaurant or concert hall. Her music inspired, comforted, and uplifted countless people, proving that talent, when combined with courage and authenticity, could leave a lasting mark on the world. And in quiet moments, when she played alone, she would remember the first hesitant notes, the astonished faces of the guests, and the thrill of discovering that her music had power. Those memories remained a source of joy and inspiration, a reminder that true artistry came from the heart, and that the courage to share it could transform not only her own life, but the lives of those who listened.